I'm Chris Lawson, and I wanted to tell you today about something that I consider the number one biggest mistake you could make in Oracle performance tuning. And here it is. The mistake is setting objects in the database to parallel. For example, you might set a table to parallel 32 or even parallel default. And you could do the same thing with indexes. And I think this is the biggest mistake you could possibly make. I've encountered several databases where we've seen this happen, and it is very difficult to fix. So I recommend you don't set objects in the database to parallel, especially high degrees of parallelism. Let me explain why this is such a big mistake. If you set a table or an index to parallel, that every time someone executes a SQL referencing that object, the optimizer will try to invoke that much parallelism. So for example, if you make the terrible mistake of setting a table to parallel default, then every time someone does a query on that table, the optimizer will try to launch as many parallel processes as so what really happens is that you lose control of your database. Normally, you use a SQL hint, for example, to set the parallelism. If you set it at the object level, then you have lost control. And that what usually happens is that you end up with so much parallelism, you have to try to restrict it in some other fashion. What can also happen when you make this mistake is that certain jobs get the parallel processes that are actually needed by a more important job. For example, suppose you start an unimportant job that uses parallel 64. Well, perhaps a minute later, a very important job starts that needed those processes. And if you've used up all the parallel processes allocated, then your next job will not get it. Now, you might think that you could simply set limits at the database level. And of course, you can set the maximum parallel processes. But that's really an indication that your database is out of control. And perhaps you could set the limit, say, to be 256 processes. That doesn't really solve the problem. It just means it keeps the database from exploding, but it's not really the right way to solve the problem. So to summarize, use a SQL hint to set the parallelism. Do not set the objects in the database, and certainly do not set them at high levels of parallelism. I've seen this mistake happen on more than one occasion, and it causes complete chaos in the database. What usually happens is the DBA needs to restrict the total number of parallel processes at this instance level. And of course, that doesn't mean anything about the proper allocation of the processes. It just means you've set the limit as a database instance as a whole. Now, DBAs often make the mistake of leaving an index set to parallelism. This happens, for example, if you rebuild an index, say parallel 16, and you forget that the optimizer will leave it set to parallel 16 when you're done. Many DBAs have made this mistake. I've made this mistake, and it's easy to fix. One thing we do is we always look for objects in the database that are set to something other than parallel 1. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching, everybody.